The asteroid field near Jupiter looked empty to most sensors, but Captain Lisa Stone knew better. Hidden among the floating rocks was humanity's most desperate gamble, a ship that existed in places normal physics said were impossible. Lisa's small fighter craft drifted between the asteroids, following coordinates that Dr. Rodriguez had sent her 3 days ago. Around her, space seemed normal enough, but her instruments were picking up strange readings that made no sense. There, she whispered to herself, spotting a shimmer in the darkness that her eyes could barely track. The temporal pioneer hung in, space like a ghost made solid. Its hull seemed to bend light around itself, creating an effect that made Lisa's head hurt if she looked at it too long. The ship was smaller than she had expected, built for a single pilot and packed with technology that humanity was only beginning to understand. "Lisa, do you see it?" Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication system from the hidden laboratory. "I see something," Lisa replied, maneuvering her fighter closer to the strange vessel. "It keeps looking like it's in 3 different places at once." "That's because it is." Dr. Kate Wilson's voice joined the conversation. Kate was Rodriguez's chief engineer, a woman who had spent her entire career pushing the boundaries of what was possible. "The quantum field generators create probability clouds around the ship. It exists in multiple potential locations simultaneously." Lisa docked her fighter with the temporal pioneer and transferred over, feeling a strange tingling sensation as she crossed between the 2 ships. The moment she stepped onto the ghost ship, the universe felt different. Colors seemed more vivid, but also somehow uncertain, as if they couldn't decide what shade they wanted to be. When Lisa moved her hand, she could see faint afterimages showing where her hand might have been if she had moved it differently. "Welcome to quantum space," Rodriguez said through the intercom. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm in 3 places at once," Lisa replied, settling into the pilot's seat. The controls looked familiar, but they seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her touch. "Is this normal?" "We think so," Kate Wilson replied. "The quantum field affects human consciousness in ways we're still trying to understand. Your brain is naturally quantum, so it adapts to the multiple probability states." Lisa looked at the tactical display and felt her breath catch. She could see the Council fleet approaching from 3 different directions at once, following 3 different attack patterns. But somehow, she knew that all 3 possibilities were equally real. "Rodriguez, I can see them coming," Lisa said, her voice filled with wonder. "I can see every choice they might make." "Then you're ready for the real test," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Lisa, we've got incoming. Council forces found our laboratory. They'll be here in 2 hours. Through the quantum field, Lisa could see the approaching enemy ships like ghosts of the future, their weapons charging, their shields powering up. But she could also see something else, the paths between realities where she could strike without being struck back. "Beginning combat test," Lisa announced, her hands moving over controls that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. The temporal pioneer lurched forward, but not in any direction that normal physics would recognize. Lisa felt herself moving through probability space, sliding between the gaps in reality where cause and effect became suggestions rather than laws. The first Council ship appeared on her sensors, a massive Hive collective destroyer bristling with weapons. In normal space, it would have been suicide for a single fighter to attack something that size. But Lisa wasn't operating in normal space anymore. She could see the destroyer's weapons firing at her, the deadly energy beams reaching out to turn her ship into vapor. But she could also see the probability paths where those beams missed, where her ship existed just slightly to the left of where the aliens expected it to be. Lisa chose that reality and made it real. The energy beams passed harmlessly through empty space while her own weapons struck the destroyer from an angle that shouldn't have been possible. The alien ship's shields flared and failed, unable to block attacks that came from multiple directions simultaneously. "Impossible!" came the voice of the Hive Collective commander over the open radio frequency. "How are you firing from positions you don't occupy?" Lisa smiled grimly as she lined up her next attack. "Because we don't think the way you do." The battle lasted 3 hours in normal time, but for Lisa, it felt both instantaneous and eternal. She experienced every possible outcome of every decision, every path the enemy might take, every way the fight could end. And in experiencing all possibilities, she learned to choose the ones where humanity won. When the last council ship exploded, Lisa found herself surrounded by debris that existed in 17 different configurations depending on how the battle had ended. Her ship had taken damage in some realities and none in others, creating a strange overlap where her hull was both scarred and pristine. "Rodriguez, are you getting this data?" Lisa asked, her voice strange to her own ears. "We're getting everything," Rodriguez replied, excitement clear in her transmission. "Lisa, you just destroyed an entire battle group by yourself, but more importantly, we understand how the quantum consciousness works now." Dr. Kate Wilson's voice was filled with scientific fascination. "Lisa, your brain patterns are showing something remarkable. You're not just seeing multiple realities, you're thinking in them. Your consciousness has become quantum coherent." "What does that mean?" Lisa asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "It means you're becoming something new," Rodriguez replied. "Something the Council has never encountered before. A human who can exist in superposition states, who can make decisions that affect multiple timelines simultaneously." Lisa looked at her hands and saw them flickering between different possibilities. In one reality, they were steady on the controls. In another, they were reaching for her weapon. In a third, they were typing commands on a keyboard that existed in a parallel probability. "I can feel it," she whispered. "I can feel the universe branching around every choice I make." "That's evolution in action," Rodriguez said softly. "The quantum field isn't just a tool, Lisa. It's changing us into something the galaxy has never seen before." Through the quantum connection, Lisa could sense other humans beginning to undergo the same transformation. Dr. Carl Murphy, still wearing his prototype quantum suit, was learning to walk through walls by existing in the spaces between atoms. Commander Steve Collins was developing the ability to communicate across multiple realities at once. But she could also sense something else, a growing awareness among the Council forces that they were facing something beyond their understanding. "Rodriguez, they're scared," Lisa reported. "I can feel it through the quantum field. The Council forces aren't just fighting us anymore. They're terrified of what we're becoming." "Good," Rodriguez replied firmly. "Fear will make them desperate, and desperate enemies make mistakes." Lisa brought the temporal pioneer back to the hidden laboratory, phasing through the asteroid's surface rather than using the normal docking bay. As she stepped out of the ship, she could see the quantum field effects spreading through the facility. Dr. Rodriguez looked older than she had a week ago, but her eyes were bright with possibilities that stretched across multiple timelines. "Lisa, we need to accelerate the program. The Council is mobilizing everything they have for a final assault on human space." "How long do we have?" Lisa asked. "Days, maybe weeks," Rodriguez replied. "But it doesn't matter. We're not going to run anymore." Kate Wilson looked up from her computer displays, which were now showing probability cascades that human technology couldn't have calculated before. "The quantum evolution is spreading faster than we expected. Every human who gets exposed to the field develops some form of quantum consciousness." "What's our next step?" Lisa asked. Dr. Rodriguez smiled, and Lisa could see the expression existing in multiple probability states, each one showing a different level of determination. "We build a fleet, not ships like the Council knows, but vessels that exist in quantum superposition. We're going to teach humanity how to fight in multiple realities at once. And then," Lisa pressed, "then we show the Council what humans become when they have nothing left to lose," Rodriguez replied. "We're going to win this war by evolving beyond anything they can comprehend." As Lisa looked around the laboratory, she could see the future, branching out in countless directions. In some timelines, humanity was destroyed. In others, they became conquerors. But in the brightest possibilities, they became something else entirely. Gardeners of reality itself. Beings who could nurture the growth of entire civilizations, the choice of which future to make real was now in human hands. And Lisa Stone, the first human to fully embrace quantum consciousness, was ready to help her species choose wisely. 3 weeks after their first victory, Jake Morrison stood before the largest devourer fleet anyone had ever seen. Intelligence reports said it contained over 300 ships, including massive command vessels that dwarfed anything in the Coalition fleet. The enemy was heading directly for the Meridian Defense Platform, the most important Coalition base in this sector. If it fell, the Devourers would have a clear path to a dozen inhabited systems. "Captain," Beth Williams said from her communication station, "we're receiving final battle orders from Coalition Command." Jake read the orders and felt his heart sink. The Coalition was planning the largest defensive operation in their history, using every traditional tactic they had ever developed. 3 separate battle lines, coordinated flanking maneuvers, and overwhelming firepower concentrated at specific points. It was exactly the kind of large-scale engagement the Devourer AI was designed to counter. "Admiral Blake," Jake said on the secure channel, "please tell me you've seen these orders." "I've seen them, Captain. Coalition Command is so confident after our recent victories that they're throwing everything they have at this battle." Jake understood the problem immediately. The Coalition thought their traditional tactics were working because the humans had been secretly making them work. Now they were planning a massive operation based on completely wrong assumptions. "Admiral, if we follow these orders, the Coalition is going to lose everything." "I know. That's why we're not going to follow them." Admiral Blake called an emergency meeting of all human ship commanders. Jake took a shuttle to the flagship, his mind racing with possibilities. The meeting room was packed with every human officer in the fleet. Admiral Blake stood before a holographic display showing the approaching Devourer force. "People, we have a problem," she began. "The Coalition is about to commit to a battle they cannot win. Their traditional tactics work in small engagements when we're there to secretly support them, but this is different." Captain Julie Davis studied the tactical display. "Admiral, even if we use every trick we've developed, I don't see how 12 human ships can influence a battle this large." Commander Alex Thompson nodded grimly. "The Devourers will have too many ships for us to herd around like we did before, and their AI will be looking for the kind of anomalous behavior that gave us away in our last few engagements." Jake had been thinking about this problem for days. "Admiral, what if we don't try to influence the main battle at all?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we go after the real target? Look at this formation." Jake manipulated the holographic display to highlight specific ships in the Devourer fleet. 3 command vessels in the center, heavily protected. That's where their AI coordination systems are located. Lieutenant Commander Tony Rivera's eyes lit up. "Captain, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I'm thinking that we've spent 3 weeks learning to confuse Devourer AI systems with our weapons and tactics. Maybe it's time to try something more direct." Dr. Lisa Grant looked skeptical. "Jake, those command ships are protected by at least 50 escort vessels each. Even if our unconventional tactics work, we can't fight through that kind of defensive screen." Navigator Paul Jackson had been studying the fleet positions. "Actually, we might not have to fight through them. Look at how they're arranged." He highlighted movement patterns on the display. The Devourer fleet is using a standard protective formation around their command ships, but it's designed to counter Coalition attack patterns. They're expecting frontal assaults and flanking maneuvers. Jake began to understand. "But they're not expecting infiltration." "Right," Jackson continued. "If we approach using movement patterns that look like space debris or damaged ships, we might be able to get close to the command vessels without triggering their defensive protocols." Tony Rivera was practically vibrating with excitement. And once we're close enough, I can try something I've been working on. Instead of just modifying our weapons to confuse their systems, what if we upload a virus directly into their command network? Admiral Blake looked around the room. You're talking about the most dangerous mission in human military history. 12 ships against the largest Devourer fleet ever assembled. Jake nodded. Yes, Admiral, but if we succeed, we could end this war. And if we fail? If we fail, the Coalition loses anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting on our own terms. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. They were talking about abandoning the main Coalition force and attempting what amounted to a suicide mission against impossible odds. Captain Gary Phillips broke the silence. Admiral, I volunteer to lead the infiltration team. So do I, Julie Davis added. One by one, every human commander in the room volunteered. Admiral Blake looked around at the faces of people who were willing to risk everything for a plan that probably wouldn't work. All right, she said finally. But we do this right. Tony, you have 6 hours to prepare whatever virus or hacking program you think can bring down their command systems. Paul, I want infiltration routes that look like natural debris fields or ship malfunctions. Jake felt a mixture of terror and excitement. Admiral, what about the Coalition forces? We tell them we're following orders. Combat Wing 47 is being deployed to a flanking position to support the main attack. They won't know we've gone rogue until it's too late to stop us. The next few hours passed in frantic preparation. Tony Rivera worked with Dr. Grant to develop a computer virus based on human programming languages that no galactic AI had ever encountered. Navigator Jackson plotted approach routes that would make the human ships look like damaged Coalition vessels drifting away from the battle. Captain Davis coordinated with the other ship commanders to plan their attack on the Devourer command vessels. They would have one chance to get close, upload Tony's virus, and escape before the enemy defensive systems could respond. Jake spent his time reviewing everything they had learned about Devourer tactics and technology. He was looking for any weakness they could exploit, any advantage they hadn't considered. Captain, Beth Williams said, I've been monitoring Devourer fleet communications. Their AI systems are definitely looking for the kind of tactical anomalies we've been using. Can you tell if they've figured out what we've been doing? Not completely, but they are suspicious. They've classified human ships as unpredictable and assigned additional monitoring resources to track our movements. That was both good and bad news. The Devourers knew humans were dangerous, but they still didn't understand why. Admiral Blake's voice came over the comm system. All ships, final briefing in 30 minutes. Jake looked around his bridge at the crew that had become his family over the past few months. They all knew this might be their last mission together. Whatever happens, he told them, I want you to know it's been an honor serving with all of you. Beth smiled. Save the speeches for after we save the galaxy, Captain. The final briefing was short and direct. Admiral Blake laid out the plan in simple terms. The human fleet would break away from Coalition forces during the initial engagement. They would approach the Devourer command ships using stealth and deception. They would upload Tony's virus and retreat before enemy defenses could respond. If this works, Admiral Blake said, the Devourer fleet will lose coordination and become vulnerable to Coalition attack. If it doesn't work, we'll be destroyed, but at least we'll take some of them with us. War Leader Thane's voice crackled over the Coalition command frequency. All units, prepare for final advance. Today we destroy the Devourer menace forever. Jake almost felt sorry for the massive alien warrior. Thane genuinely believed that Coalition tactics would win this battle. He had no idea that his forces were walking into a trap designed by an enemy that had studied their methods for 1,000 years. All ships, Admiral Blake broadcast on the human channel, execute Operation Longshot. The human fleet moved into their assigned positions as the Coalition forces began their advance. To any observer, it looked like Combat Wing 47 was following orders perfectly. Then the Devourer fleet responded, and everything changed. The enemy ships moved with deadly precision, exploiting every weakness in the coalition formation. They concentrated, fire on command vessels, disrupted communication networks, and systematically destroyed the coalition's ability to coordinate their attack. Within minutes, it was clear that the coalition was losing badly. All human vessels, Jake broadcast, begin infiltration approach. One by one, the human ships broke away from the main battle. To the coalition forces, it looked like Combat Wing 47 was retreating in panic. To the Devourer fleet, it looked like damaged coalition ships were drifting away from the battle. Navigator Jackson's approach routes worked perfectly. The human ships moved through space like debris from destroyed coalition vessels, following ballistic trajectories that looked completely natural. "Captain," Tony Rivera reported, "Devourer scanning systems are reading us as non-threatening. Our energy signatures look like failing life support systems and damaged engines." Jake watched the tactical display as they drifted closer to the massive Devourer command ships. They were less than 10,000 kilometers away now, close enough for Tony's virus upload to work. "All ships," he broadcast, "prepare for simultaneous upload on my mark." The 12 human vessels continued their seemingly helpless drift toward the enemy fleet. They looked like the wreckage of 6 months after the Battle of Meridian Defense Platform. Jake Morrison stood in the Coalition Council chambers facing representatives from dozens of alien species. The massive room buzzed with translation devices and the sound of dozens of different languages being spoken at once. Admiral Blake sat beside him at the human delegation table. They were the only 2 humans in a room full of beings who still couldn't quite believe what had happened. The Cronus representative, war leader Thane, rose to speak. His 4 eyes focused on Jake with something that might have been respect. "The Coalition owes humanity a debt that cannot be repaid," he rumbled. "Your actions at Meridian saved not just our forces, but potentially every inhabited world in this sector." Murmurs of agreement came from around the room. The Vorthon delegate clicked her approval in their musical language. Even species that had never spoken to humans before were nodding their various forms of heads. But Jake felt no satisfaction. 8 human ships had been lost in the battle. Good people had died because he had made the choice to attack rather than retreat. The Coalition's top military analyst, a spindly creature called Keeper Vex, activated a holographic display showing battle statistics. The human infiltration of the Devourer command network was the first successful penetration of enemy systems in over 300 years of warfare, Vex announced. More significantly, the virus they uploaded has provided us with detailed information about Devourer capabilities and weaknesses. Admiral Blake leaned forward. "What kind of information?" "Complete tactical databases, ship specifications, and most importantly, the location of their primary construction facilities." The room fell silent. For the first time in the history of the war, the Coalition knew where the Devourers were building their fleets. "There's more," Keeper Vex continued. "Analysis of the human virus program has revealed why it was so effective. Human computer programming follows logical patterns that are completely unknown to galactic AI development. The Devourer systems had no defense against programming languages they had never encountered." Jake looked around the room at alien faces that were trying to process this information. For centuries, they had assumed that military technology was fixed and unchangeable. The idea that humans could simply create new approaches was difficult for them to understand. "Keeper Vex," Admiral Blake said, "what are the Coalition's plans for future operations?" "That is why we have called this meeting," Thane replied. "The Coalition War Council has voted to offer humanity a permanent position as strategic advisors." Jake felt surprised. "Strategic advisors?" "More than that," said the Vorthon delegate, her voice singing even through the translation device. "We want human officers to train Coalition forces in adaptive tactics. We want human engineers to work with our technology specialists to develop new weapon systems. We want to learn how to think like humans." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. A few months ago, the Coalition had considered humans to be primitive cannon. Fodder. Now they wanted to learn human military methods. "There's something else," Keeper Vex added. "We've received communications from several neutral species that have been monitoring the war. Word of human tactical innovations has spread throughout this region of the galaxy." A new holographic display showed star maps with dozens of previously unknown civilizations. 17 different species have requested human assistance in defending against devourer attacks. 3 others want to join the Coalition specifically to work with human forces. Admiral Blake exchanged glances with Jake. "That's a lot of responsibility." "Yes," Thane agreed. "But it's also an opportunity. For the first time in centuries, we have a real chance to end this war." After the formal meeting ended, Jake and Admiral Blake met privately with Keeper Vex and a small group of Coalition military leaders. "We need to be honest with you," Admiral Blake said. "What humans did at Meridian wasn't just tactics. It was desperation. We knew we were probably going to die, so we took risks that no sane military force would consider. But that's exactly what made it work," Keeper Vex replied. "Coalition forces have been so focused on minimizing casualties and preserving honor that we stopped taking the kind of risks necessary to win." Jake had been thinking about this for months. "The problem isn't that you lack courage. The problem is that you've been fighting the same war for so long that you've forgotten how to adapt." "What do you mean?" "Every species in the Coalition has ancient military traditions that worked well for thousands of years. But the Devourers have had time to study and counter all of those traditions. You need to be willing to abandon methods that no longer work." Thane looked uncomfortable. "You're asking us to abandon the wisdom of our ancestors." "No," Admiral Blake said gently. "We're asking you to honor your ancestors by being willing to learn new wisdom. The best way to respect their sacrifices is to make sure their deaths weren't meaningless." Over the following weeks, human officers spread throughout the Coalition fleet. Tony Rivera worked with alien engineers to develop weapons that could be modified in real time during battle. Navigator Paul Jackson taught Coalition pilots movement patterns based on Earth biology and physics. Dr. Lisa Grant established communication protocols that allowed for rapid tactical adaptation. Beth Williams trained alien communications officers in the art of coordinated improvisation. The results were remarkable. Coalition forces began winning engagements they would have lost months earlier. More importantly, they were winning in new ways, using tactics that kept evolving faster than the Devourer AI could adapt. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Gary Phillips arrived from Earth with a team of human scientists and a proposal that changed everything. "We've been thinking about this war all wrong," he announced at a Coalition strategy meeting. "We've been treating it as a military problem, but it's really a technological problem." Phillips activated a display showing Devourer ship construction patterns. "Look at how they build their fleets. Everything is standardized. Every ship uses the same AI systems, the same weapons, the same defensive protocols." Jake began to understand. "Standardization makes them predictable." "Exactly. And predictability makes them vulnerable. But here's the interesting part. We think we can use their own standardization against them." Phillips showed detailed analysis of the virus that had crippled the Devourer fleet at Meridian. The virus didn't just disrupt their command systems, it also copied their entire tactical database and transmitted it back to us. "What does that mean?" Admiral Blake asked. "It means we know how they're programmed to respond to every possible threat. We can predict their tactics better than they can predict ours." Colonel Susan Martinez had arrived with Phillips and the Earth team. She took over the briefing. "We're proposing a coordinated campaign against all known Devourer construction facilities, but instead of using traditional assault tactics, we hit them with simultaneous viral attacks designed to corrupt their entire manufacturing network." The alien representatives looked confused. This was thinking on a scale they had never considered. You're talking about attacking their entire civilization at once, Keeper Vex said slowly. That's exactly what we're talking about, Colonel Martinez replied. The Devourers have been winning because they think systematically. They coordinate all their actions through centralized AI networks. But that coordination is also their weakness. Jake was beginning to see the scope of what the humans were proposing. If we can corrupt their central systems, we can stop them from building new ships, coordinating attacks, or even communicating between their fleets. Right. Instead of fighting a 1,000-year war of attrition, we end it in a few months. The coalition voted unanimously to support the human plan. Within weeks, joint human-alien teams were developing virus programs in dozens of different programming languages. They created attack vectors that no galactic AI had ever seen before. The campaign began 3 months later. Coordinated strikes hit Devourer facilities across 12 star systems simultaneously. Each attack was different, using locally adapted tactics and unique technological approaches. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Devourer construction stopped completely. Their fleets lost the ability to coordinate large-scale operations. Most importantly, they lost the adaptive learning that had made them so dangerous. Jake stood on the bridge of his new ship, the Horizon's Promise, watching the last major Devourer fleet surrender without firing a shot. Their AI systems had been so thoroughly corrupted that they could barely maintain life support, let alone fight. Captain, Beth Williams said from her station, we're receiving surrender communications from the Devourer command ship. Jake could hardly believe it. After 1,000 years of war, the enemy was giving up. Put them through. The main screen showed a creature that looked nothing like what Jake had expected. The Devourer commander was tall and thin, with large eyes that seemed filled with exhaustion. Human. Vessel, the alien said in heavily accented galactic standard. We request terms for surrender of all Devourer forces in this sector. Jake looked at Admiral Blake, who nodded. We'll accept your surrender, Jake said. But we want to understand something. Why did you attack the Coalition in the first place? The Devourer comm. 6 months after the Battle of Meridian Defense Platform, Jake Morrison stood in the Coalition Council chambers facing representatives from dozens of alien species. The massive room buzzed with translation devices and the sound of dozens of different languages being spoken at once. Admiral Blake sat beside him at the human delegation table. They were the only 2 humans in a room full of beings who still couldn't quite believe what had happened. The Cronus representative, war leader Thane, rose to speak. His 4 eyes focused on Jake with something that might have been respect. The Coalition owes humanity a debt that cannot be repaid, he rumbled. Your actions at Meridian saved not just our forces, but potentially every inhabited world in this sector. Murmurs of agreement came from around the room. The Vorthan delegate clicked her approval in their musical language. Even species that had never spoken to humans before were nodding their various forms of heads. But Jake felt no satisfaction. 8 human ships had been lost in the battle. Good people had died because he had made the choice to attack rather than retreat. The Coalition's top military analyst, a spindly creature called Keeper Vex, activated a holographic display showing battle statistics. The human infiltration of the Devourer command network was the first successful penetration of enemy systems in over 300 years of warfare, Vex announced. More significantly, the virus they uploaded has provided us with detailed information about Devourer capabilities and weaknesses. Admiral Blake leaned forward. What kind of information? Complete tactical databases, ship specifications, and most importantly, the location of their primary construction facilities. The room fell silent. For the first time in the history of the war, the Coalition knew where the Devourers were building their fleets. There's more, Keeper Vex continued. Analysis of the human virus program has revealed why it was so effective. Human-computer programming follows logical patterns that are completely unknown to galactic AI development. The Devourer systems had no defense against programming languages they had never encountered. Jake looked around the room at alien faces that were trying to process this information. For centuries, they had assumed that military technology was fixed and unchangeable. The idea that humans could simply create new approaches was difficult for them to understand. "Keeper Vex," Admiral Blake said, "what are the Coalition's plans for future operations?" "That is why we have called this meeting," Thane replied. "The Coalition War Council has voted to offer humanity a permanent position as strategic advisors." Jake felt surprised. "Strategic advisors?" "More than that," said the Vorthan delegate, her voice singing even through the translation device. "We want human officers to train Coalition forces in adaptive tactics. We want human engineers to work with our technology specialists to develop new weapon systems. We want to learn how to think like humans." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. A few months ago, the Coalition had considered humans to be primitive cannon fodder. Now they wanted to learn human military methods. "There's something else," Keeper Vex added. "We've received communications from several neutral species that have been monitoring the war. Word of human tactical innovations has spread throughout this region of the galaxy." A new holographic display showed star maps with dozens of previously unknown civilizations. 17 different species have requested human assistance in defending against Devourer attacks. 3 others want to join the Coalition specifically to work with human forces. Admiral Blake exchanged glances with Jake. "That's a lot of responsibility." "Yes," Thane agreed, "but it's also an opportunity. For the first time in centuries, we have a real chance to end this war." After the formal meeting ended, Jake and Admiral Blake met privately with Keeper Vex and a small group of Coalition military leaders. "We need to be honest with you," Admiral Blake said. "What humans did at Meridian wasn't just tactics. It was desperation. We knew we were probably going to die, so we took risks that no sane military force would consider." "But that's exactly what made it work," Keeper Vex replied. "Coalition forces have been so focused on minimizing casualties and preserving honor that we stopped taking the kind of risks necessary to win." Jake had been thinking about this for months. "The problem isn't that you lack courage. The problem is that you've been fighting the same war for so long that you've forgotten how to adapt." "What do you mean?" "Every species in the Coalition has ancient military traditions that worked well for thousands of years. But the Devourers have had time to study and counter all of those traditions. You need to be willing to abandon methods that no longer work." Thane looked uncomfortable. "You're asking us to abandon the wisdom of our ancestors?" "No," Admiral Blake said gently. "We're asking you to honor your ancestors by being willing to learn new wisdom. The best way to respect their sacrifices is to make sure their deaths weren't meaningless." Over the following weeks, human officers spread throughout the Coalition fleet. Tony Rivera worked with alien engineers to develop weapons that could be modified in real time during battle. Navigator Paul Jackson taught Coalition pilots movement patterns based on Earth biology and physics. Dr. Lisa Grant established communication protocols that allowed for rapid tactical adaptation. Beth Williams trained alien communications officers in the art of coordinated improvisation. The results were remarkable. Coalition forces began winning engagements they would have lost months earlier. More importantly, they were winning in new ways, using tactics that kept evolving faster than the Devourer AI could adapt. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Gary Phillips arrived from Earth with a team of human scientists and a proposal. That changed everything. "We've been thinking about this war all wrong," he announced at a Coalition strategy meeting. "We've been treating it as a military problem, but it's really a technological problem." Phillips activated a display showing Devourer ship construction patterns. "Look at how they build their fleets. Everything is standardized. Every ship uses the same AI systems, the same weapons, the same defensive protocols." Jake began to understand. Standardization makes them predictable. Exactly. And predictability makes them vulnerable. But here's the interesting part. We think we can use their own standardization against them. Phillips showed detailed analysis of the virus that had crippled the Devourer fleet at Meridian. The virus didn't just disrupt their command systems. It also copied their entire tactical database and transmitted it back to us. What does that mean? Admiral Blake asked. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the research vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the stars through the main display. His crew had been mapping this part of space for 3 months now. It was quiet work, but Jake liked it that way. The universe was big enough without looking for trouble. Captain, we're picking up something strange, said Communications Officer Beth Williams. She turned from her control panel with worry in her eyes. It's not like anything we've seen before. Jake walked over to her station. What kind of strange? A transmission. But it's coming from everywhere at once, like someone is broadcasting to this entire sector of space. Beth pressed a few buttons. The signal is strong, really strong. Whoever sent this has power we can't even imagine. Can you decode it? I'm trying, but the language is completely unknown. We need Dr. Grant. Jake pressed the comm button. Dr. Lisa Grant to the bridge. Priority 1. Dr. Grant arrived within minutes. She was the best linguist on the ship, maybe one of the best in human space. If anyone could figure out this message, it would be her. Show me what you have, she said, sitting down at Beth's station. The next 4 hours passed slowly. Jake watched Dr. Grant work, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. She ran the signal through every translation program they had. She compared it to every known language in Earth's databases. Finally, she looked up. Her face was pale. I've got most of it, she said. But you're not going to like what it says. Jake sat down. Tell me. The message is from something called the Galactic Defense Coalition. They say Earth has been chosen to join their war effort. We have no choice in the matter. War effort? Dr. Grant nodded. There's an enemy out there. They call them the Devourers. According to this message, they destroy entire star systems, eat whole planets. The Coalition has been fighting them for a long time. Beth looked confused. But we've never heard of any Galactic Coalition. We thought we were alone out here. That's because they never bothered to contact us before, Dr. Grant said. The message makes it clear. We're what they call a primitive species. They only contact primitive species when they need soldiers. Jake felt cold. Soldiers? The message says Earth must provide ships and crews for the war. We're being assigned to something called the 47th Combat Wing. A fleet will arrive at Earth in 2 weeks to collect our forces. The bridge went quiet. Jake stared at the display showing peaceful stars. In 2 weeks, everything would change. There's more, Dr. Grant said quietly. I found some technical data in the transmission. The Coalition has been fighting this war for over 1,000 years. The 47th Combat Wing is where they send species that can't fight effectively. It's a suicide mission. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself in command of a much larger fleet. Admiral Karen Blake had arrived from Earth with every ship they could spare. Military vessels, converted cargo ships, even some passenger liners with weapons bolted onto their hulls. It wasn't much, but it was everything humanity could give. Admiral Blake called a meeting of all ship captains. Jake looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had volunteered for what everyone knew was probably a death mission. I won't lie to you, Admiral Blake said. Earth's military analysts have gone through all the data we could find about this coalition. The news isn't good. She activated a holographic display showing ship designs and battle records. The coalition has lost over 300 species to these devourers. Each time they follow the same pattern. They assign the new species to a combat wing, give them basic weapons, and send them into battle with no training or support. Captain Julie Davis raised her hand. What about the species that survived? The ones that are still fighting all have one thing in common. They're physically powerful, strong, fast, or heavily armored. The Coalition seems to believe that raw strength is the only thing that matters in this war. Lieutenant Commander Tony. Rivera, the chief engineer, looked at the weapon specifications on his tablet.
Admiral, these energy weapons they've given us are incredibly basic.
The design hasn't changed in hundreds of years. It's like they stopped trying to improve them. Admiral Blake nodded. That matches what we've learned about coalition military doctrine. They have ancient traditions about honor in combat. They believe their ancestors' methods are perfect and shouldn't be changed. Jake studied the battle records. Every engagement followed the same pattern. The coalition fleets would form up in massive formations and attack directly. Sometimes they won through overwhelming numbers. Usually they lost. "Admiral," he said, "have any of these species ever tried different tactics?" "No. According to the records, they all fight the same way. The strong species use heavy weapons and frontal attacks. The fast species use speed and agility, but they never adapt or change their methods." Commander Alex Thompson looked grim. "And the Devourers have had 1,000 years to learn how to counter these tactics." "Exactly," Admiral Blake said. "Which brings us to our situation. Humanity isn't the strongest or fastest species. We don't have natural armor or energy manipulation abilities. According to coalition standards, we shouldn't be able to contribute anything meaningful to this war." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Dr. Grant spoke up. "I've been monitoring coalition communications. Most of the alien commanders consider us cannon fodder. They expect us to follow orders, fight bravely, and die quickly so the real warriors can handle the important battles." Jake felt anger building inside him. "They're not even going to train us?" "No," Admiral Blake said. "Coalition policy is clear. Primitive species learn by doing, or they don't learn at all. They'll give us coordinates and targets. Everything else is up to us." Navigator Paul Jackson had been quiet during the meeting. Now he looked up from his tablet. "Admiral, I've been studying the movement patterns in these battle records. Every coalition species uses the same basic formations. It's like they all went to the same military academy centuries ago and never graduated." "What do you mean?" "Admiral," Blake asked. "Look at this," Paul said, projecting his analysis onto the main display. Three-dimensional formations, predictable spacing, textbook flanking maneuvers. It's all very neat and organized, but it's also completely predictable. Tony. Rivera nodded. "Same with their weapons systems. Everything is standardized across all species. They might have different power levels, but they all work exactly the same way." Jake looked around the room. "So we're going into a war where the enemy knows every possible move our allies might make, where no one is allowed to change tactics or improve technology, and where we're expected to die heroically without making any real difference. That about sums it up," Admiral Blake said. Beth Williams had been reviewing communication logs. "Admiral, I found something interesting. The Coalition has detailed records on every species' combat abilities and methods, but they have no data on humanity at all." "Of course not," Admiral Blake said. "We've never fought in their war before." "No, that's not what I mean," Beth said. "They have no data on how humans think about warfare. They don't know our history or our methods. To them, we're completely unknown." Jake felt something shift in his mind. An idea was forming. Dr. Grant looked excited. "Beth is right. Every species in the Coalition follows the same basic patterns because they've been part of this galactic civilization for thousands of years. They all learned warfare from the same sources, but humans developed our military thinking completely, independently." Admiral Blake studied the faces around the table. She could see the same thought forming in everyone's mind. "You're suggesting we don't try to fit into their system?" she said slowly. Jake nodded. "I'm suggesting we use the fact that we're outsiders. They expect us to fail, so they won't pay much attention to how we fail. That gives us room to try things they would never consider." The meeting ended with more questions than answers. But, for the first time since receiving that alien transmission, Jake felt something besides fear. He felt hope. 3 days later, the human fleet reached the Coalition staging area. Jake stood on his bridge and watched alien ships that looked like nothing he had ever imagined. Massive vessels with crystalline hulls, sleek fighters that seemed to be made of living metal, warships covered in spikes and armor plating, all of them following the same flight patterns, all of them using the same formation protocols, all of them completely predictable. "Captain," Beth said, "we're receiving docking instructions. We're being assigned to berth 47C. Jake smiled grimly. Even their parking spaces were organized according to ancient tradition. "Take us in, Paul," he said. "Let's go learn how not to fight this war. Every weapon system in our fleet, the Devourers won't know what hit them." Navigator Paul J. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display as the human fleet took their assigned positions. Around them, massive coalition forces arranged themselves, in the same three-line formation they had used for centuries. Everything looked exactly like every other battle in the coalition records, except for one small detail that only the humans knew about. "Tony, are the modifications complete?" Jake asked. Lieutenant Commander Rivera looked up from his engineering station with a grin. "All systems modified and ready, Captain. The other ships in our fleet report the same status." Jake activated the private communication channel Admiral Blake had set up for human forces only. "All ships, this is Morrison. Sound off." One by one, the human captains confirmed they were ready. Captain Julie Davis on the Defiant. Commander Alex Thompson on the Resilient. Navigator Paul Jackson had been transferred to the Swift under Captain Gary Phillips. 12 ships total, all crewed by humans who had no intention of following coalition doctrine. "Admiral Blake, we're in position," Jake reported. "Good. Remember, we're going to look like we're failing at first. Don't let the coalition forces get suspicious." Jake understood. If their plan was going to work, they needed the Devourers to think the humans were just another weak coalition species. The Devourer fleet approached exactly as War Leader Thane had predicted. 50 dark ships in a loose formation, moving with the deadly grace that had terrified the galaxy for 1,000 years. "Captain," Beth Williams said, "I'm picking up Devourer scanning attempts. They're trying to analyze our fleet composition and capabilities." "Let them scan," Jake said. "They'll see exactly what they expect to see." On the surface, the human weapons looked identical to standard coalition energy systems. The Devourer AI would classify them as harmless and predictable. It had no way of knowing what Tony Rivera had done to their internal programming. The battle began exactly like every other coalition engagement. The Cronus battleships opened fire with massive energy cannons. The Vorthon fighters began their elaborate attack dances. The other coalition species fell into their traditional patterns, and the Devourers started winning immediately. Jake watched as Devourer ships slipped through defensive formations like they had done it 1,000 times before. They concentrated fire on weak points, exploited gaps in coverage, and stayed just out of range of the coalition's most powerful weapons. "Combat Wing 47, advance to secondary positions," War Leader Thane ordered. This was the moment. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They all knew what came next. "All ships," he broadcast on the human channel, "begin Operation Chaos." To any outside observer, the human fleet looked like it was suffering massive system failures. Their formations broke apart. Their energy signatures became erratic. Their movement patterns turned completely random. The coalition forces barely noticed. They were too busy fighting their own losing battle to pay attention to Combat Wing 47's apparent collapse. But Jake was watching his tactical display with growing excitement, because the chaos wasn't random at all. Navigator Jackson had based their movement patterns on Earth-ocean currents. They looked chaotic from the outside, but they followed mathematical principles that created unpredictable eddies and flows around the battlefield. Communications Officer Williams was coordinating their attacks using a modified version of jazz improvisation theory. Each ship had a basic rhythm to follow, but they could improvise around it based on local conditions. And Tony Rivera's weapon modifications were working perfectly. Captain, Tony reported. First test successful. The Devourer scanning systems are reading our weapons as standard coalition energy cannons. They have no idea we've changed the frequency modulation patterns. Jake watched as the human fleet's seemingly random movements brought them closer to a group of Devourer vessels that were systematically destroying a Cronus battle line. All ships, execute Pattern 7, he ordered. To the Devourers, it looked like a desperate and poorly coordinated attack by primitive vessels with failing systems. The Devourer AI calculated optimal defensive responses based on 1,000 years of similar encounters. Then the humans opened fire. The energy beams that emerged from the human ships looked wrong. They changed color in mid-flight. They shifted. Frequency faster than any coalition weapon system could manage. They hit Devourer shields and passed right through like the shields weren't there. Direct hits on 3 enemy vessels, Thompson reported from the Resilient. Their defensive systems aren't adapting. Jake felt a surge of triumph. That's because they can't adapt to weapons that are changing faster than they can analyze them. The Devourer ships that had been confidently maneuvering to destroy the apparently crippled human fleet suddenly found themselves under attack by weapons that behaved unlike anything in their databases. One Devourer vessel tried to retreat. Captain Phillips, following Jackson's navigation plan, had positioned the Swift in exactly the right place to intercept it. His modified weapons tore through the enemy ship's hull like it was made of paper. Captain, Dr. Grant said, monitoring Devourer communications. They're confused. Their AI systems are reporting impossible weapon signatures. But the real test came when the Devourer fleet tried to counterattack. Their tactical AI analyzed the human ship movements and predicted where they would be in the next 30 seconds. It was a calculation that had worked flawlessly against every coalition species for centuries. The problem was that humans didn't follow coalition movement doctrine. Navigator Jackson had programmed their flight paths based on Earth weather patterns, specifically hurricane formations. The ships moved in spirals that tightened and loosened according to mathematical formulas that had nothing to do with galactic military tradition. The Devourer counterattack targeted positions where human ships would have been if they were following standard coalition tactics. Instead, the humans were somewhere completely different, hitting the Devourers from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Enemy formation is breaking up, Julie Davis reported from the Defiant. They're trying to adapt, but they can't predict our next moves. Jake watched the tactical display with amazement. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1, but they were winning. More importantly, they were winning in a way that looked like complete accident to the coalition forces. War Leader Thane's voice crackled over the coalition command frequency. Combat Wing 47, your formation has collapsed. Return to designated positions immediately. Jake responded with fake static and garbled transmission artifacts. Sorry, War Leader, we're experiencing major system malfunctions. Trying to regain control. Meanwhile, Tony Rivera was having the time of his life. Captain, I'm picking up Devourer attempts to hack our weapon systems. They're trying to override our modifications. Can they do it? Not a chance. They're using hacking protocols designed for coalition systems, but our modifications are based on human programming languages they've never encountered. It's like they're trying to pick a lock with a banana. The tide of the battle was turning. The coalition forces were still fighting their traditional losing battle, but the human fleet was systematically destroying Devourer vessels that had never faced truly unpredictable opponents. Captain, Beth said, I'm detecting a change in Devourer fleet behavior. They're starting to retreat from our sector. Jake could hardly believe it. They're retreating? Not from the main battle, Dr. Grant clarified, studying the sensor readings. They're pulling back specifically from areas where our ships are operating. It's like they've decided we're too dangerous to engage directly. Commander Thompson had an idea. Captain, what if we coordinate with the coalition forces? Make it look like their traditional tactics are suddenly working? Jake thought about it. If they could make the coalition believe their ancient methods had achieved victory, It would give the humans more opportunities to test their unconventional approaches. All ships, he broadcast, begin Phase 2. Make it look like the Coalition is winning. The human fleet shifted their apparently chaotic movements to support Coalition formations, but they did it in a way that looked like pure accident. Captain, Davis positioned her ship so that fleeing Devourer vessels ran directly into a Cronus battle line. The Cronus ships, which had been losing badly a few minutes earlier, suddenly found themselves with easy targets. Navigator Jackson guided human ship movements to create what looked like a Vorthon tactical maneuver, the Vorthon fighters following. Their traditional patterns found themselves in perfect position to attack confused Devourer forces. To the Coalition commanders, it looked like their time-tested strategies were finally working. They had no idea that human ships were secretly herding the enemy into vulnerable positions. The Devourer fleet began a full retreat. For the first time in recorded galactic history, they were withdrawing from a battle they should have won easily. War. Leader Thane's voice boomed across the command frequency. Victory! The Devourers flee before the righteous might of the Coalition. Jake exchanged glances with his crew. They all knew the truth. The Devourers weren't fleeing from righteous might. They were retreating because their advanced AI systems couldn't cope with opponents who refused to fight predictably. Admiral Blake, Jake said on the secure human channel, mission.